Okay. Yes, this paper is co-authored with Ken Itakura at Nagoya State University. And I'd like to talk about whether the United States should rejoin the Trans-Pacific Trade Deal today. Well, before the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, entered into force, the United States withdrew from the trade accord in January 2017. 11 other TPP signatories decided to revive the agreement, which led to the implementation of the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for TPP, or CPTPP. They are both economic and political incentives for the United States to re-engage with the Trans-Pacific Trade Deal. Concerning economic incentives, US welfare and real GDP will increase, but by small percentage. Contrary to popular belief, we find that a large contraction of output and employment in US manufacturing will not occur. That is, sectoral adjustments will be small. Concerning political incentives, geopolitical factors are also important for trade agreements. For example, Hines suggests that geopolitical considerations play a significant role in the choice of partner countries and the depth of economic integration. Eichengreen et al. Indicate that both economic variables and geopolitical factors are important for bilateral trade agreements. Well, the objectives of this study are, first, to estimate economic warfare effects under 3 scenarios of TPP/CPTPP. Secondly, to evaluate the extent of real GDP losses to the US from its withdrawal from TPP and expected US gains if it rejoins CPTPP. And finally, to examine whether the US economy would have to undergo considerable sectoral adjustments from its participation in CPTPP. There are a number of studies that have quantified the effects of TPP and CPTPP using a CG model, such as Ferrantino et al., Gilbert et al., Lee and Worley, Petri et al., Petri and Plummer, World Bank, USITC, and so forth. Petri and Plummer's 2016 estimates of welfare gains in 2030 range from 0.5% in the US to 8.1% in Vietnam. I think their estimates are rather high compared to many other studies. But in any case, all studies show that smaller and more open member countries are expected to attain relatively large welfare gains. Well, we use the dynamic GTAP model developed by Jančevičina and McDougall. And since most of you know about the dynamic GTAP model, let me skip its model structure and just mention that the time dimension of this model is from 2014 to 2035, and the model is calibrated to a 2014 base year using version 10 of the GTAP database. Well, we have decided to aggregate regions into the following 19 countries and regions, including all the CPTPP member countries and potential future CPTPP member countries, including the UK, Thailand, Indonesia, the Philippines, and so forth. And we have 15 sectors in the model, a little bit emphasizing manufacturing sectors. And in the baseline scenario, we make real GDP projections, projections for population and workforce and so forth. As you can see, let me note that the baseline includes the trade accords that have already entered into force, including all the ASEAN +1 FTAs, EU, Korea, Korea, US, China, Korea, EU, Japan, and US, Japan trade agreements. We assume that tariffs are cut by 80% among the member countries of the FTAs that are being implemented. And finally, productivity is assumed to increase by 1% a year in all sectors of each region. Then we have following 3 policy scenarios. In scenario 1, so far, 7 of the 11 CPTPP member countries have ratified the agreement in Congress, and they have already started to implement the agreement since 2019, which are Australia, Canada, Japan, Mexico, New Zealand, Singapore, and Vietnam. Then we assume that remaining 4 member countries, i.e. Brunei, Chile, Malaysia, and Peru, plus the United Kingdom, which applied for a membership in February this year. These 5 countries will become members next year in 2022. And that'll be followed by additional 4 economies, namely Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, and Taiwan will become CPTPP members in 2025. US does not become a member under scenario 1. Then scenario 2 is different from scenario 1 in just one aspect. That is, the United States also become a member of CPTPP in 2025. Then finally, scenario 3 is a hypothetical scenario, assuming that the US had never withdrawn from TPP, so that we can compare the results from scenario 3 with those with scenario 1 and scenario 2. Okay, we provide foreign policy shocks. First is tariff reductions, which are based on the actual TPP tariff commitment schedules for each commodity in member countries compliant by International Trade Center. And we know that the timeline differs significantly across commodities. Some agricultural commodities takes 16 years to reduce tariffs, whereas many manufacturing products, it's much quicker, like, immediately or within 5 years and so forth. And while tariffs are reduced to zero in most commodities within 10 years, in several commodities, some tariffs will remain after 2035. Then, in addition to tariffs, we also have 25% cuts in other volume tariff equivalents of non-tariff barriers on services trade. Right now, we're using Wang et al.'s 2009 estimates and the values employed by Michigan model, but we might update to more recent estimates. Then, thirdly, we have 25% cuts in the time cost of trade. For example, shipping delays arising from regulatory procedures and inadequate infrastructure. Then finally, we have a gradual increase in productivity in agricultural and manufacturing sectors from 1% a year in the baseline to 1.1% a year over a 10-year period after a member country starts implementing the TPP or CPTPP. And the reason for doing that is that a number of previous studies, such as Treffler and Cheng et al., show that import liberalization results in an increasing productivity through various reasons. And the reason why we decide to increase by only by 0.1%, 0.1% is CPTPP is only one of many FTAs, and we assume that marginal increase in productivity resulting from CPTPP to be 0.1 percentage point after taking into consideration of all FTAs included in the baseline. Then going to the welfare effects of 3 policy scenarios in 2030 and 2035. Well, I will mainly look at 2035. Well, in scenario 1, percent changes in economic welfare relative to real income range from 0.4% in Australia to 3.6% in Thailand, where Thailand is assumed to join CPTPP in 2025. Under scenario 2, in which the US returns to the Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement in 2025, the economic welfare of most of the CPTPP countries becomes larger compared to under scenario 1, as expected. The US welfare gains is only 0.2% in 2030 and 0.4% in 2035. Then under scenario 3, where US, we assume that US had never withdrawn from the TPP, US welfare gain would be also 0.4%, both in 2030 and 2035. Then I'd like to show you real GDP changes in the United States. Even though the effects on real GDP do not include the terms of trade effects, policymakers often prefer looking at real GDP effects to referring welfare effects because real GDP is more familiar to them. US real GDP changes relative to the baseline projections over the 2019 to 2035 period plotted in this graph. And let's see, then under scenario 1, where US never joins CPTPP, then its real GDP is projected to be about $41 billion smaller than under the baseline in 2035. Then under scenario 2, when the US is assumed to become a member of CPTPP in 2025, in 2035, US real GDP would increase by about $84 billion, or 0.33%, higher than the baseline projections. Then under scenario 3, if the US had stayed in TPP, real GDP will be somewhere around $112 to $114 billion, or 0.44% higher per year during 2031 to 2035. Then next, I'd like to show you the US sectoral output adjustments for the year 2035. Well, under scenario 1, basically almost all output of all commodities decline slightly, mainly because US trade with CPP member countries will decrease. Then under scenario 2, some sectors like agriculture, food products, petrol and chemical products, and some services output would increase, but many manufacturing sectors will experience small reduction in output. And then finally, in scenario 3, it turns out that only output of textiles and apparel decline, whereas all other sectors are projected to increase slightly their output. So
2 minutes, please.
Yeah, good. So to conclude my presentation, to give you a summary, the United States would lose opportunity to gain 0.4% in its economic welfare by 2030 if it never rejoins the CPTPP. If the US rejoins the CPTPP in 2025, its welfare is projected to increase by 0.2%, and 0.4% in 2030 and 2035, respectively. Secondly, if the US returns to the CPTPP in 2025, output of several manufacturing sectors is projected to decline by small percentages in 2035, but that is more than offset by output expansion in the primary and tertiary sectors. But since sectoral output adjustments in the US are small, its adjustment costs from participation in CPTPP would be limited. And finally, even though not being examined in this paper, US re-engagement with the Trans-Pacific trade deal might be desirable for two additional reasons. First, its return to CPTPP is likely to facilitate a reduction in US dependence on Chinese intermediate products and a greater diversification in its supply chains. And secondly, after the UK becomes a member of CPTPP, 4 member countries have defense pacts with the US, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and the UK, which might provide a political incentive for the US to rejoin the trade accord amid escalating tensions with China. Okay, that will end my presentation. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. That was very interesting. And I'm going to go to the chat for questions, please. 1 second. So first question, do you think the present situations related to COVID-19 affects the policy decisions by the US to rejoin CPTPP, e.g. early return? Do you have any plan to consider the COVID-related economic or political effects in your simulation scenarios?
Since we never did simulations, I have to just speak out of my speculation. I do not think the COVID will affect US decisions to return to CPTPP time schedule very much. Because it appears that for the United States, joining CPTPP is relatively low priority right now. So I don't think it's going to happen in the next 2 or 3 years, but maybe, around 2025, in the beginning of the either second term of Biden administration or new president. So I don't think COVID is going to affect US decision that much.
Okay, thank you. Second question going down my list, how much does the productivity growth contribute to GDP growth? If without productivity growth, would CPTPP have such significant effects?
Yes, that's a good question. Yes, if there are no changing productivity, then it will have much smaller effects. For example, the United States, rather than 0.4%, US welfare gains will be only 0.15%. So productivity, even though 0.1% increase is going to is playing an important role in our results. and I should probably know that somewhere in the paper. And likewise, other countries like Vietnam, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, also the effects become bigger. Not as much as twice as big, but maybe close to around one percentage point bigger. So it doesn't make a difference.
Okay, thank you. One comment in the chat from Lars Nillison. May I pose a question? Yes, as long as and I'll make sure we have time for the last question also in the chat. So Lars, if you want to unmute and ask your question, if it's easier to state it than type it, that's great.
Absolutely, thank you. I did put on my camera, but I don't see myself actually. Oh, here I am. It took some time. So thanks for the presentation. Now my question was, it's slightly related to the former one. How much does tariff reductions contribute to the impact vis-a-vis non-tariff barrier reductions? That's the first one. Second one, I work for the European Commission, and I know that in our free trade agreements, it's quite rare that we actually achieve any real services liberalization. We bind currently applied levels of protection. So I was thinking, if you find support for the 25% reduction in trade cost in services, or this is based on an assumption, and the same holds for your trade cost reduction in general, that you say that trade costs going to go down. Is there any support for this in CPTPP, or is it assumption based? Thank you.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Let me answer your second question. Yes, it is assumption based. We're thinking to use rate either 20% or 25%. We don't have any evidence or to know what might be the percentage reduction in non-tariff measures. So it is assumption based. And sorry, the first question was
the related tariffs vis-a-vis non-tariff barrier reduction. How much does each of the two contribute?
Yeah, obviously, member countries with low initial tariff rates, the effects of reducing tariffs will be rather very small, and reduction in non-tariff barriers will be bigger. Some other countries like Thailand and Vietnam have relatively high initial tariffs, so both tariff reductions and reduction in non-tariff barriers are important. I cannot remember what the breakdown between the two, with non-tariff barriers effects are bigger or not, off my head. But for many countries, reduction in non-tariff barriers appear to be larger, is my memory. Thank you.
Thank you. One last question coming in from the chat. First, thanking you for your excellent presentation. And then would you explain more about your methodology, such as intermediate or output productivity, which boosts directly GDP growth on slide 13? And the second question, the US has already bilateral FTA with some of the CPTPP countries. The second one is that the US uses economic power to get more advantage in bilateral FTA negotiations. And that's regarding paper by Koyama and Urata. What makes the US concerned about rejoining CPTPP, especially unwilling of reducing full tariff removal? So two questions there. I will start with the one on slide 13. Thanks.
Let's see. So sorry, I wasn't taking memo. Now the question
Oh, I'm sorry. The question
So
for this slide is, could you please explain more about your methodology, such as intermediate or output productivity, which boosts directly GDP growth on the slide you have at 13 here?
yeah, we have only increasing output productivity. We do not have increasing intermediate productivity here. I forgot the quote. Let's see. So it's an overall productivity, the constant term in production function that is increased by 0.1%. And now, I'm not sure the person who is asking question wants something more for answer.
Well, no, that was a good answer. And we have a minute if you have a chance to address his second question about the U.S. already having bilateral FTAs with some of the CPTPP countries.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, U.S. already has bilateral FTAs with Singapore, Japan, and of course, Canada and Mexico, and I think Chile and Peru. That's 6. Seventh one, I cannot remember. But given that US already has FTAs with 7 of the 11 CPP member countries, is going to reduce the effect of US joining CPTPP, because these agreements are included in the baseline scenario. And we're comparing the results relative to the baseline so that effects become smaller.
Okay, well, thank you. Probably plenty more we could talk about, but I'm going to move along now so we can keep on schedule. So thank you. That was an excellent presentation. Our next presenter, Chen Pan, is going to talk about the impacts of China-US trade frictions on the global economy and China's subnational economy. So Chen, I will turn it over to you. And if you could share your screen, that would be fantastic.
Oh, yes. Excuse me, do you see my screen now?
Yes, we can. I can see the screen. I assume everyone else can also. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I'm Chen Pan from Tsinghua University. It is a pity that Dr. He Jianwu is not able to participate in our seminar, so I will present our research of the impacts of China-US trade friction on both the global economy and China's subnational economy. My presentation will follow this outline. First, I will introduce briefly about the research background, and then move to the methodology and data details. Following that, I will show some results of our study, and finally, the conclusions. As we know that China-US trade friction started in the year 2018, this table shows the process of the tariff that US imposed on China started from the year 2018. Between the year 2018 to 2019, there were 4 months. Sorry?
Oh,
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry. If you could move down, we're still looking at, yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So this table shows the process of the tariff imposed on China. There were 4 rounds of tariff imposing. In total, there were 550 billion exports from China to US were imposed, and China followed by China's responses, of course. As we know that in the background of the trend of deglobalization, we think that the China-US trade frictions is still with great uncertainty. This is reinforced by the huge shock caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Actually, in the context of globalization, the impact of the tariffs are actually global. With the global value chains deepening division of labor, countries are connected tightly with trade. The tariff imposed on China will actually cause a domino effect across the global production network. So here comes to our research question 1. What are the global impacts of the China-US trade friction, and who will suffer and how much? In terms of Chinese provinces, since there are 31 provinces in China, at their industry structures, the natural endowments, the economic and social conditions is very different. We think that the Chinese provinces will suffer in different ways. This figure shows the per capita GDP. The per capita GDP of Chinese provinces in the year 2019. We could find that the highest value, which is as much as 140,000 yuan from Beijing, but the lowest is just 30,000 yuan, which comes from Gansu. So the conditions of the provinces are very different. And the different regions actually have different trade patterns and also play different roles in the global value chain. This table shows the exports data of some Chinese provinces in the year 2018. We could find that from the main destinations, the volume of the exports and especially the shares of the provincial exports in the national total is very different from province to province. In terms of the participation in the global value chain of the provinces, they differ a lot. This figure shows the composition of the provincial exports. So basically, we decompose the total provincial exports into 3 parts. The PVAR, which is in the red bar, represents the provincial value added. The rates of the provincial value added, and those in the green represent the value added rate that embodied in these provinces' exports, but actually produced by other provinces in China. And the purple bars represent the rate of the value added that actually produced of other countries. So we can find that the shares are very different from province to province. For example, here Beijing, its own value added only account for around 20% of its total exports, while those for Hubei, Qinghai province, like those their own value added accounted for a large share. So the China-US trade friction will influence China's provinces in different ways, and it will not only affect China's economic growth, but it also affects the spatial economic layout. So here comes to our second research question. What are the subnational impacts of the China-US trade friction? Who suffers the most and how? In order to investigate these questions, we use a global computable general equilibrium model here as the core model, and we apply the policy shocks to it. Here the policy shocks refers to the tariff that imposed on China by the US. And then we build a link between the CGE model and Chinese provincial MRIOT to estimate the impacts on China's exports by industry. And further, we could get the impacts of the tariff on Chinese provincial GDP and employment. On the other path, we could directly get the impacts of the tariff on the global economy. So this is the framework of our methodology. Here comes the details. The CGE model we take in this study is the envisage model, which is a GTAP data-based model. It provides 19 countries and regions and 24 sectors in total. And the Chinese provincial multi-regional input-output model here we used is based on the year 2012. In particular, we update the export vector to the year 2017. And the linkage between the CGE model and the Chinese MRIO model is actually a soft linkage. So what we did was to simply input the results of the CGE simulations into the MRIO model. This is the method of estimating the impact on provincial exports at GDP. What we get from the CGE model is the relative change in exports of China at the sector level. Multiply this by the Chinese provincial exports, we could get the changes in the Chinese provincial exports. And further, we could get the by multiplying the with the Liang different inverse as well as the value added rate, which could get the value added changes of the provinces. And further get the relative impacts on provincial GDP. For the provincial employment, the method is very similar, so I will not repeat it again. These are the scenarios designed in our work. Scenario 1 is based on the tariff that US imposed on China in 2018. The total amount is $250 million exports to the US. Scenario 2 based on the $300 billion tariff, the tariff that imposed on the 300 billion exports to the US from China. And scenario 3 is actually the combination of scenario 1 and 2. Here comes the results. In terms of the impacts of the US tariff on the global economy, what we get from the CGE model is the impact relative. Here we show the relative impacts of the tariff on the GDP of the countries and regions. In scenario 3, we find that the US tariff will cause a relatively large decline in GDP of China, US, the EU, Japan, and Korea. The tariff on China will also impact their major trade partners. The GDP of their major trade partners like Japan, Korea, the EU, Mexico will also suffer from the tariffs. In addition, we find that this tariff will accelerate the transfer of some industries and parts of the production to countries and regions like Asia and Mexico, while making Chinese products less competitive in the US market, creating opportunities for other developing countries to join the global division of labor and gain access to the US market. These are the results of the impacts on Chinese provincial GDP. The tariff will influence the Chinese provincial GDP in two ways. One part is the direct impacts, which refers to the impacts caused by changes of the exports of the province itself. Another part is the indirect impact, which refers to the impact caused by changes of exports from other provinces. In this figure, we use the green bars to present the direct impacts and the red bars of the indirect impacts. We find that the total and direct impacts of US tariff on the GDP in Chinese eastern coastal provinces such as Guangdong, Zhejiang, Jiangsu, Fujian, and Shanghai is much larger. And for the central and western provinces such as Anhui, Shanxi, in the Mongolia, Gansu, the impact of the exports in other provinces will indirectly affect the GDP of these provinces. Further, we decompose the top three provinces, Guangdong, Zhejiang, and Jiangsu, the changes in their GDPs into at the sector level. This is the figure for Guangdong. We could find that the manufacturing of communication equipment, computer, and other electronic equipment accounted for the largest share in the changes in Guangdong's GDP, followed by the electrical machine and equipment, and the manufacturing of textile wearings also accounted for a significant part. This is related to two reasons. One is the industrial structure of Guangdong province, who is a large exporter of electronical products. Another reason is related to the actually the tariff, the commodity list that was imposed a tariff. This is the decomposition for Jiangsu provinces. The electronical products is still a major part in its changes, and we could also find that the manufacturing of chemicals and chemical products also accounted for a big share. That's because this sector is a major industry of Jiangsu province. Followed by Zhejiang's decomposition. The textile wearing and the electrical machine are still among the tops. And also for Zhejiang, the agriculture sector will also suffers. Okay, then comes to the impacts on provincial employment. Similar with the GDP, the results of GDP, the employment of the provinces is also influenced by two parties. One is the direct impacts, which is caused by the changes in exports of the province itself. Another is the indirect impacts. And actually the structure of employment is also similar with those of GDP. We could see that the impact on the employment of the coastal provinces, like Guangdong, Zhejiang, Jiangsu, Fujian, etc., at the central province Henan, are more significant. In addition, for the coastal provinces, impacts on their employment is mostly due to the direct shock. But for the central and western provinces, the direct impacts play a vital role. This is related to the fact that the inland provinces participate in the global value chain mostly via the exports of the coastal provinces. It comes to the conclusions, and by link the CGE model at the Chinese provincial MRLT model, we find that the Chinese-US trade friction here is in particular the tariff imposed on China by the US will have impact on the global economic growth, as the economic integration makes all the economies depend on each other. Their major trade partners like Japan, Korea, the EU, and Mexico will all suffer from the friction. For China, for Chinese provinces, we find that China's central and western provinces indirectly participate in the GVC division of labor by providing energy, raw materials, and primary products. So they have not get rid of the dependence on resources. Meanwhile, those eastern provinces depend on a large share of intermediate products imports. These findings suggest that China needs to further extend and deepen the domestic links of GVC so that the central and the western provinces can better participate in the GVC. In the future, since the scenarios used in our study is not that new, so we will pay close attention to the latest developments in the China-US trade relationship and update the scenarios. Then we will also update the Chinese multi-regional input-output table used in the study, and we'd also like to try to build a global CGE model with Chinese domestic regions embedded, so that we can better simulate the impact of the trade frictions on value chains. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That was an excellent presentation and quite interesting and timely, of course. Questions, I'll start with questions in the chat. 1 second, I lost my place here. Okay. First question, since you use input-output model with decomposing value added, which part loses more value added? Provincial, foreign, or other domestic regions?
That's a very good question. I think this is what we missed in our study, and we will further see if these parts, the decompositions, will tell a story. Thank you so much for the question.
Thank you. Another question. Thank you for your contribution. As far as I know, US-China imposes tariff on agricultural products. And your aggregation is to focus on manufacturing industries like 21 sectors. Why is it important? I assume that's why is it important to focus on the manufacturing sectors?
Okay, thank you for the question. Here, the reason that we focus on manufacturing industry is that actually a significant part of the tariff is imposed on ITC, the electronical products. So that's why we decomposed the manufacturing industries. And we, in the future, we will pay more attention to the agriculture products. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question. Excellent presentation. Are the effects expected to be lasting or just for a few years and then go away? Literature seems to indicate that tariffs and tariff wars effects might be short-lived.
I think it's difficult to say whether it will last for a long time. Here in our simulation, it's actually just a simple shock to the current system. So in the future, whether tariff will, the effects will tariff will last. Sorry, I don't have the answer for now.
All good, thank you. Any further questions in the chat? Anyone wants to pose? All right, may I ask a question if we have a few minutes? And this might be my ignorance of MRIO specifications, but within China, do you expect movement of people across different provinces? Is that allowed in the model? Is that something you observe in the data?
You mean the movement of the labor?
Yes.
Labor force, right? We did not consider the movement of the labor force. We simply input the changes in exports into the MRIO model. I think this is a limitation of using a MRIO model to do the research. So that's why we want to try to build a city model with Chinese provinces embedded in the future.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Thank you.
May I ask? I think we have time to ask one further question. One thing that surprised me when on slide 15, just the results from the envisaged model, the GDP results, I was surprised by Canada. It looked, unless I'm reading it incorrectly, it looked like Canada gained. It was the farthest bar to the right. And I would have thought Canada's so linked to the US that if the US had issues, Canada would as well. So that was a surprise to me.
So the reason behind this, we think that it is because that the products from China is less competitive in the U.S. market. So the market there are more Canada's has a strong trade relationship with the U.S. So some of the markets will perhaps transfer to other countries. Other trade partners.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Any further questions from the audience? All right. Well, thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation. I'll speak for the group here. And then I think we're a few minutes ahead of schedule, which is fine. And so we'll give Binkus Vale a chance to get the PowerPoint loaded, and we'll be talking about, does China's business matter to South America?
Great, thank you. Let's see if I can share. Can you see my screen?
Yes, that looks great. I can see it.
Great.
And so, welcome. If you could get us started, that would be fantastic.
Okay, great. Okay. So, good morning, everyone. Maybe good afternoon. I don't know where you are. So, thank you so much to be here. So today I'm gonna present this working paper, Does China's Business Matter to South America? Yeah, the answer is yes, China matters to everyone. So this is an important question I will show you. So in this working paper, uh, I'm working with Fernando Perabelli and Guilherme Salgueiro, both from Federal University of Juiz de Fora in Brazil. And me, Vinicius, I'm from Federal University of Paraná in south of Brazil. So the main motivation behind this working paper is because the imports from China by South American uh, has increased a lot in the past. So if you look at the 10 years uh, before, we can see that this increased a lot. So here, for example, I have some data. So I can see that the share of imports from China by South America has increased by more than 15%. In 1995, it was like 2%, and now it's almost 17. So actually in 2014, the base year of our model. So if you look at the import share in 2014 for the South American countries, we can see that the China imports a lot. So we can see that, for example, Brazil, the share was 16%, so Colombia 16 as well. So we can see, for example, Chile, that the percent and the import share was almost 22%. So this is very high. So I will show you more in a few slides. So, okay, we know that this can be good when we look at the consumer side. So because it represents a benefit since there have been more low cost goods available here. However, we can also say that this important penetration has increased a lot the competition in the South American countries. So we can see, for example, some substitution effect in favor of Chinese goods. So this is a very important issue here. So we can see that the main concern in South America is related to indirect effects. So how this penetration and the important penetration has increased the competition and how this affected the South American countries. So I can say that the Chinese goods compete with the export goods from South America, especially when we look at the developing countries. I mean, the export from South America to developed countries. So this is the main idea behind the paper, the motivation. So I will explain a little bit more in a few slides. Okay, we know that our export can compete with the Chinese goods. This is it's not so good, but I can tell you that although this competition exists, there is also a complementarity between South American countries and Chinese economies. So this is the main idea behind the paper, to look at some sensitivity shocks to see how South American countries will respond to the shock. So we can also look at how the South American countries can take some advantage of the Chinese business. I mean, Chinese has increased a lot the market in a few years. So how this can be good for the South America countries. So this is very important. And in this kind of the context, the main idea behind the paper is to explore these channels. So the channels of interactions between China and South American countries. So to do this, we will explore the changes in prices of China trade goods. So we will use the GTAP model. So it's a global model. I know that most of you are familiar with the model. So we consider some South American countries. So we change a little bit this special aggregation. So we consider Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Paraguay, Peru, Uruguay, and Venezuela, and then China and the rest of the world. So as I will show you, we will explore some changes in price. So why this kind of shocks? Because we know that China is bigger, so China has a very large market. So it's possible to influence world price. So I will show you a little bit more in our strategy. So here I show you just a trade analysis. So here we have the export shares. So we can see here the origin and here the destination. So if we look at this first column, we can see how important is China to South American countries. We can see large shares here. For example, Brazil. So we can see that Brazil exports a lot to China. Actually, if you look at the trade partner in Brazil now, China is the most important country. We export a lot of crops, so mining to China. So it's very important in terms of partner. So we can also see this for example, Chile, Uruguay, and other South American countries. If you look at the import shares, we can see also that China is very important to South American countries because we have a lot of import penetration during the past, and now this is a very large share. So, for example, Brazil, China is also the most important country. So we can see that 16% of the import comes from China in Brazil. So we can see for Chile, Peru, Uruguay, both are large shares. So this is just a very simple picture about the trade between China and South America. So just to show you how China is important to South America in terms of export and import shares. Here we have the same idea and the export shares to China, but now we just open by commodities. So we can see, for example, that when we look at the export side, we can see that we export a lot of crops, mine energy, and metal to China. So most of our export comes from these commodities. We can also see the import shares from China by commodities. And here we can see that South American countries export chemicals and equipment. So this is very different. So here we just show this to let you know that maybe we can see some complementary in the trade because Brazil and other South country America export a lot of primary goods, and China is the opposite when we consider this trade partner. Here we have a simple trade complementary index. So here we just consider the relevant comparative advantage index. So we calculate this by commodity, by country, and then we just compare. So just to see if the country that has a comparative advantage in one good has disadvantage in other. So just to have some idea about the complementary between China and South American countries. Here we can see that we highlight those index greater than the average. So of course we can see that most of the South American countries show some complementarity between them. So because we are here in the same region, so we have some agreements. So we have this kind of complementarity between our production. We cannot see that the trade complementary index is greater than the average with China, but I will show you when we change the price, we affect a lot the South American country economies. So the methodology, as I told you before, is a very, let's say, the standard model. So we just consider the CGE model. So we just use the GTAP database, so the standard one. So the main idea is to explore the chains of interactions among China and South America countries. So the idea is to capture the impact of China business upon South American countries. So we will consider a decrease in China's trade good price. So will be kind of a sensitive analysis because we will decrease the price by 10%. So one by one, and then look at the results. So actually I will use the subtotal. So the strategy is based on this idea that China has a significant participation in the international market. So the second largest GDP in the world. And we can see that China has also a solid exportation model. So this, of course, gives the country price forming stats in the global foreign market. So based on this assumption, so the shock will be to decrease the market price of all Chinese commodities. As I told you, it will be like 10%. So we will look at each commodity and then we will calculate all the macroeconomics index and so on. So just the database. So we use the GTAP 10, so the last one available. We use 2014 as the base year. So I show you the trade analysis for 2014 because this. So as I told you, we consider most of the South American countries, China, and the rest of the world. So here we have some results. So here we have the macroeconomic effects. So first, I can look at the real GDP. So it's possible to see that all regions had increased their real GDP. So when we decrease the price of China trade goods, so of course we can see that China had the greater increase because we just simulate a decrease in the market price. So this of course gives China a relative advantage. So we can see, for example, when we look at the export, import, and trade balance, we can see that China may increase its export, but all the other countries decrease the export. Of course, because we are simulating a decrease in China world price, so this will affect all the world. So, however, we can see, for example, that some countries will present a positive trade balance. I will show you in a few slides the results by commodities, because we can see that some commodities will decrease the export, but other will increase. So this is important because we have some complementarity between China and South America countries. So we can see some specialization. So this is important. Let's see. We can see that the import increase in most of the, actually all the countries except China, again because the shock that we are simulating here. So I guess it's pretty much this, just to highlight you, for example, that in Brazil we can see a positive trade balance. We can also see a positive trade balance to China and to other countries here. But I just want to highlight here the Brazil trade balance that increase actually more than other countries. When we look at the welfare here, we can see that actually all the countries has increased the welfare gains. So we can see here, and we can also see that the real consumption increased in all the countries and in the rest of the world. So this is pretty much because we can see a resource allocation effect. So when we look at the welfare decomposition, we can see that the resource allocation effect dominate all the other effects. So the terms of trade and the investment savings terms of trade. So pretty much we can see here that the resource allocation effect is the most important to the welfare effect that we see here in the macroeconomic effects. Let's see here, we have the trade balance changes by subtotal. Subtotal here means that when we decrease the price of grains in China, how will be the effect in trade balance of each country. So here we just have this to see which commodity can contribute more to the trade balance in South American countries. So I can highlight here some results. So we can see, for example, that the decreases in import price from China will affect a lot the South America country, especially when we look at the other food production. When we look at the wearing appears, and when we look at the beverage and tobacco. So these are the most simulation decrease price that will affect the South American countries. So we can also highlight the results for Brazil, because we can see here that when we have some change in crops, in metal, this will increase the trade balance of Brazil. So we can see here that crops and metal will be, when we have this kind of decreased price, this will affect Brazil, and this will possible increase the trade balance. So this is important because when we look at our exportation now, we just export a lot to China in terms of crops. So this makes sense, because when we have some change in price, Brazil used to export more. So this is pretty much the idea behind this result that I'm highlighting.
2 minutes, please.
Okay. So just to conclude, so as I told you, this is a working paper. So it's a very simple exercise, but it's a very important one, because when we have this kind of sensitivity analysis, we can see which country gain and which country lose and we can also highlight some sector results, so we can think about other ideas. So just to answer the question, does China business matter to South American country? Yes, we can see that China's business matter to South American countries. We can observe that there is an unbalanced relationship between China and South America, and we can see that China can compete with South American countries when we look at the export to other regions, to other countries. So we can see that this will affect the export from South America to third countries. And the other question that we can ask is China's business good or not for South American countries? Of course, we can see that some positive and negative effects. So we can see, for example, in terms of GDP, real consumption, and welfare, we could see that all the countries will increase this the GDP, real consumption, and welfare. However, we can also highlight that some countries will have a negative impact in terms of trade balance. So this is important because this affects the economy. So for today, I just prepared this. Any comments will be very welcome. Some ideas, as I told you, it's a working paper, so the idea is just to present and collect some comments and so on. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. That was an excellent presentation, and I'll open the floor to questions. And again, if you have a question, if you could please put it in the chat. And while I'm waiting for other questions, I do have a question, if that's okay to start. For your aggregation, you put everything in rest of world. Do you have, I think, unless I misinterpreted the slide, do you have plans to break out the European Union or the US if those are also important trade partners in South America?
Yes, this is a good question. Actually, in this exercise, I just put every other country in the rest of the world, just because, actually, just to focus on South American countries and China. But of course, we will open this. Actually, in my thesis, I just simulate some agreement between Brazil and European Union and the United States, and we can see that this is very important. So maybe the next step is to open a little bit more the model and see how this will affect the relationship between South American and European Union, because it's a very important region to us as well in the United States. So it's a very good idea. Thank you so much.
All right, well, questions have come in, so I'll just start in the order in which they are received. First question, what was your scenarios, and did you change the closure?
Yes, the scenario is just to decrease the world price from China. So we decrease this by 10%. So we do this for each commodity, so one by one, to collect the results. So to do this, we change the closure because it's necessary to put the world price of China exogenous. So we just change this. It's the same simulation when we thinking about, okay, this is a small country, the world price will be not affected, so let's put this exogenous. So in our case, we put this exogenous, but we shock. So this is the main idea.
Thank you. A second question that's come in. First, very nice presentation. Did you check robustness, especially elasticity of agriculture in terms of long and short term?
Not yet, but of course we need to check this. We know that, for example, the elasticity of agriculture, it's very important to Brazil, for example. So we know when we change the price in agriculture, we export a lot. So, for example, now we are during a pandemic, and if you look at the export to the Brazilian export now, we can see that we are exporting a lot of crops because the price change. So the world price change, and we start to export more and more. So, and this is affecting the Brazilian economy a lot. So we can see that the price is increased in the Brazilian market because we just export everything. So yes, it's a very good idea, and maybe then we will try to focus in some countries. Because I'm from Brazil, I really want to see how Brazil will be affected in this kind of exercise. So maybe we can implement some sensitive analysis considering the elasticity of some agricultural commodities.
Thank you.
Great.
Any other questions or comments? All right, well, thank you. That was an excellent presentation. I think we can move on to the final speaker in our group, Alma Cortez Silva, talking about, does COVID-19 make consumers discriminate Chinese products? Evidence from Amazon. So if you could, excellent, get started there.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, whether it be night or morning. It's very early in the morning for me. So this is a project that we came up with two other colleagues at Purdue University, Danyang San, who is actually also here, so she may field a lot of the questions and then you put in. It's about COVID-19 and the discrimination toward Amazon, toward Chinese products in Amazon. So it's a little bit different from standard trade, where we're analyzing import and exports, but we're actually trying to do it through Amazon data. So I don't even have to explain how COVID-19 has affected all of our lives. It really has upended for all of us. But an important thing to mention is, given that China was the first country to report cases of COVID-19, normally the stigma is associated with China and then the Chinese products. And then we were seeing that China and then Chinese sellers and Chinese providers are a major player for Amazon. And then Amazon is just a gigantic business for commerce. So while we were doing the research, we were noticing, for example, that especially on face masks, which is the product that we're going to focus on, we were seeing a lot of comments that were not about quality, especially after Donald Trump and then some of his remarks. It was all about not being Chinese, all due to the association between COVID and China. So it was like, no mask from China, or like people complaining, I didn't know the mask was from China, or if I knew, then I would have not purchased it, or they will go in the trash. So it wasn't about quality, it was all about the Chinese stigma. So one of the things that we found it really useful when we were using Amazon is we were directly able to identify whether it was a discriminatory comment or not from the comments. So everybody is able to see in Amazon whether there's a comment. And then there was a lot of frequency of data because we were all buying masks. And then we could control for quality. So the questions that we want to cover in this essay, which is a work in progress, so please feel free to interrupt me or suggestions, comments, is two very simple questions. We were trying to determine whether consumers were discriminated against Chinese products. And then we were trying to see if they were discriminating, then does that lead to lower ratings and then hence lower sales? So this is not a standard trade topic in which you're using imports and exports, nor a standard marketing. So we're using a lot of the different literatures. Consumer behavior literature, especially Verbal and Pineda, says that country of origin is one of the key characteristics that determine perception of quality for example, for a product. So normally, a lot of the Japanese manufacturers have a signal since they're produced in Japan as being of high quality. So country of origin normally even gives the consumers a signaling of some characteristics for the product. Then we have political tensions and trade that says that even if you have trade wars, then you're going to have, the effects are going to be short-lived. Then we also we're borrowing from literature from online retailers that tell you that, for example, ratings are a vital component on whether you're going to sell or not on the e-commerce. And then there's also new literature on COVID-19 and trade that's telling you that, yes, COVID-19 affected trade. And then this is very new, and this is just some of the new findings, and then how it has diversified on how some countries have increased their imports from China, and then some have not. So it's a little bit of everything. It's borrowing a little bit of everything and not just trade as we normally think of it. So why we chose Amazon rather than eBay or some other platform? First, the Amazon is the biggest one. For 2021, it will encompass 40.4% of the entire US commerce. So it's gigantic. Another thing is there's no limit on the comments that you can give. So you are not restricted to 10, 20 words. So you can go ahead and then give as many detailed comments as you want. So that means that we can actually really see whether, because we went through the comments to determine whether they were discriminatory or not. We went one through one. So we were able to really determine whether they were just saying that, let's say it was from China, or whether they were saying, since it's Chinese, then this product is not good. We're not only using data from Amazon, but we're also using data from KIPA, which uses data from Amazon. So we're looking under a very specific group, which is the health and households in face masks, because that's where we're focusing our research. And then we're getting data from price, then the average rating, the number of ratings, the sales rank, and then we're keeping always constantly, we're keeping track of that is the same ASIN, that it is the same brand, that is the same manufacturer, that it is the same product features, and then the product description. So we get a lot of data from both Amazon, especially the comments when we're scraping some of the comments, and then a lot of information from KIPA that normally keeps track database from a lot of the Amazon products. So on the comments, we are reviewing again only for face masks, and then we are getting all the information about the title, the review comments, the content, even the name of the reviewer, and then the rating associated with the review. So for example, if the person said, okay, no, I don't want masks from China, we're going to have like whatever username they provided, when it was the review given, and then whether the person gave a 1 or a 5, which 5 is the highest rating, then 1 is the lowest rating. So with all that, we have panel data, which is unmatched. So we were collecting data that span from September 1st to 2019 to this is July, though I think now we've gone to September 2020. So we're still collecting more data. And then we match comments from more than 70,136 comments. So we have a lot of data. And then that means that it's around 1,400 final sample is CINs, which is the Amazon specific number. So let's start digesting a little bit of the information that we got. So Chinese product in our definition is whether the product is from China, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it was shipped directly from China. So it could be that a product is from China, but then it's already in a warehouse in the US. So it's not that you're going to ship it from China, but any product that is manufactured in China, regardless of whether it was shipped directly from China or the US. So what we see is, for example, we're taking different samples through different data times. First, if the product was from China, then we see that the prices are even, especially if you look at period May 1st, 2020, they might even be slightly higher than for some non-Chinese. But for example, in September 1st, 2019 and the September 7th, 2019 and 2020, then the differences are narrowing. The average rating between Chinese products and a non-Chinese product is also small. So for example, taking over here, May 1st, 2020, we see that for a non-Chinese product, the average rating was 3.81. And then for a Chinese product, it was 3.73. Then the rescale sales rank, which tells you how much they're selling on Amazon. So how big this is of a player in the context of Amazon. Then we're seeing that, for example, in May 1st, let's take this data point, the Chinese providers or sellers were actually bigger than the non-Chinese. So that's important because normally the more sales that you have, the more also comments that you're going to have. And then even the number of business days in business that Chinese sellers and non-Chinese sellers, the Chinese sellers tend to stay in business for longer than the non-Chinese. The amount of discriminatory reviews are actually small. They have increased, especially on our latest data point. So they were 2.79 in 2020, and then by September, then they were 4%. So it's not that big, but some of them have a really big impact. So what we're seeing, for example, in terms of rating, is what we saw. If product from a seller is known to be Chinese, then it does not necessarily mean that it's going to have a lower rating, but a discriminatory comment might have a greater effect. So normally we're seeing between the Chinese and the non-Chinese products, sometimes the Chinese are having a greater rating, mean of rating. So this is like whether to get 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And then within the Chinese products, we are noticing that, for example, not all discriminatory comments lead to a bad rating. So sometimes you get most of the discriminatory comments lead to a bad rating, but not all the discriminatory comments lead to a bad rating. So it happens most of the time, but it's not always the case. You might even get a bad comment just because it's from China, but then you think it's a good product, which is a bit strange, but that's what we're seeing. So let's have some examples. So for example, we were seeing people, which were actually not the majority, but the minority, they were saying, okay, I'm rating it 5, which is the highest. It's a good mask. And she's glad that she finally had it. And then, but she really disliked the fact that it came from China, which we were like, okay. And then a lot of people, what we were seeing the comments, and that's what, for example, the ones that we were classifying as discriminatory is, okay, it's crap because it's made from China, and then enough said. We were seeing a lot of these comments that they were like, I don't like it just because it came from China. So we were also looking, controlling for quality. So for example, on 3, they were saying cheaply made. So on some of our regressions, we also control for quality because we wanted to make sure that it wasn't a dislike because some of the Chinese products were lower quality, but because they were discriminating against Chinese products rather than based on quality. So on some of our first regressions, we were looking, okay, let's first see if you have a discriminatory comment, then how will that affect the rating? So what we were seeing is definitely if you have a discriminatory comment, that's going to affect your rating. And in the different types of regression, whether we were controlling for the day, whether we were controlling for ASIN, whether we had like the average rating, whether we were controlling for sales strength, we saw consistently that having a discriminatory comment would affect your rating, and then that review rating would normally we receive from online literature, online seller literature, has definitely an effect on sales. So across all the different regressions that we were trying, we were seeing, yes, discriminatory comment definitely has an effect on the rating. Now regarding quality, because one of the first questions that we got when we were doing this was, okay, it might be that Chinese products are actually lesser quality. So the comments are so detailed in most cases that normally people complained whether they don't like it because let's say that the straps broke. So if we saw comments about like the straps breaking, or whether it was bad quality, or whether like the fabric was too thin, then we normally control for quality. And then even if we control for quality, we saw that even if there were no complaints against the product about quality, still if there was a discriminatory comment, then other people and then will also rate the product lower. So another thing that we were wondering, okay, we're seeing that if there's a discriminatory comment, we're going to have a problem with the ratings, and then the ratings is going to lead to lower sales. But how long is the impact of the discriminatory comment? Because we know that Amazon keeps receiving more and more comments. So how long will that impact the rating? So we were seeing that even if we were using a lag of the share of discriminatory reviews, the impact is still positive. So for a short period of time, because we have daily data, we were still seeing that bad review in a previous day would still impact today review rating by some consumer that saw the rating. So we saw that if somebody had said something discriminatory about a Chinese face mask on Amazon, then that would have also a negative impact on the next period for the next person. The good thing is, and we will cover that later, the impact probably goes away after 20 weeks. So if we were trying also to see, okay, let's think about this in the simplest way. Let's not think about it in a complicated trade way, but let's think of this as a difference in difference. Let's try to think, okay, if we take all the Chinese sellers, is there really a difference if there's if it's known to be a Chinese seller, whether it's known or not known? So we were taking, okay, you can know whether it's a Chinese seller through the comments, or you can know whether it's a Chinese seller through the comments and the Q&A. Normally, the comments are left by the consumers. So normally, you as a consumer can say, okay, this is a Chinese product, I like it, I don't like it. Or we could be that the seller says, okay, we are a Chinese company that is located, let's say, in Beijing. And then normally, if it's the seller, of course, just puts it as a matter of fact. And then if it's somebody leaving the comment, they're going to also leave some impression of what they think about the Chinese product. So what we were seeing is if the reveal, so whether it's a Chinese seller because of the comments, then the effect on the rating is greater, because you also have the effect of the comment behind, and then all that was implied with the comment. So that would have a greater impact on the rating, even when we're controlling for price, even when we're controlling for sales, and even if we're controlling for product mix effect. If we're looking at the reveal whether it was a Chinese product through the comments Q&A, normally it's a factual thing. It will still affect whether people want to rate it higher or not, but the effect will be lower because it will be more matter-of-fact comment. So it does matter whether you're just revealing whether it's a Chinese seller or whether you're revealing it's a Chinese seller and then putting your own flavor and comments into it.
2 minutes, Alma.
Well, time flies. Thank you. The other question was, okay, is the effect, we know that different reviews in Amazon you'll have the newest comments and then you have the older comments. So we normally notice that discriminatory reviews will have an effect, and then you'll definitely see the effect, as you can see. But then at some point, the effect will go away. So like by week 12, it will not keep on decreasing the rate. So some of the main results that we definitely want to show. So we want to leave you with the message that yes, we are seeing discrimination on Amazon towards Chinese products, specifically face masks. And then that is leading to lower ratings. And then ratings means less sales for Chinese products. The effects, even if we're controlling for quality, which we would expect might affect the comments, are still that if you are revealed to be a Chinese seller within the platform, you're gonna get lower ratings. And then the effects, though are expected to last for a couple of weeks, are not permanent. We were also testing at some point whether the pre-trained was following a specific, whether the pre-trained had a specific way, and then we were seeing that it was random. So we could do a diff and diff without worrying about whether there was something worrisome or the effects were not random on the pre-trained, and then we were seeing the same pre-trained and post-trained. So that's pretty much it. All comments are appreciated since we're still working on this and then still collecting even more information to see if now with more sellers and then with more consumers, things are changing. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That was fascinating. That's a very interesting look at data. And I'll open the floor to questions if anyone would like to put something in the chat. And as we're getting started with questions, this is just a, mechanical question. I don't know. Keepa, is it free data? Are you able to, can anyone access it, or how does that work?
It is not free, but you can definitely subscribe to it. Since we were interested in making sure that we had all the information throughout the period, that's why we subscribed to it. So normally we use Amazon for collecting especially the comment data that's not stored in Keepa. And then Keepa normally does a really good track of keeping the daily prices, the daily ratings, daily changes. So it's really good so that we could keep control of everything as much as we could.
That's fascinating, yeah. And did you focus on, your focus of course was on masks, but with the data set, could you have access to all products that they?
We could do all the products. It's just we definitely started with face masks because it's normally the thing that was most linked with COVID. You were thinking, okay, face masks, COVID, and then China. So it's kind of like normally you are not thinking T-shirt and COVID, but you're like, if I'm buying a face mask, I'm buying it because I want to prevent COVID. So we were like trying to do the simplest linkage with what might be normally think of it in terms of COVID and in terms of China.
Okay, interesting. Do you think other countries were now in the US, we're hearing about the Delta variant coming from India? Do you think there will be repercussions that way? And then in other countries you should think about to expand the study?
We did not mention it here, but we have whether the seller is not just from China, but whether the seller is from the US, whether the seller is from India. So we definitely will want to test, especially now, whether the effect maybe from India or Pakistan is the same that we're seeing, because people might be afraid, oh my gosh, now they have it. So because this is new and this is not like regular inputs, so we definitely are considering testing that, since that's why we keep on collecting more and more information.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. Yeah. And I don't mean to monopolize, but when questions come in, I'll immediately shift over. But another question that struck me is, if you were the seller, can you disguise? I mean, can you say, no, I'm from some other, it's not China, it's another place that it's sold. Do you have that capacity to kind of disguise who you are, given the negative comments that you see?
I don't think so, because let's say that you as a seller are some sellers at the beginning, for example, were not included in any information. But then as soon as people receive the product, they're normally looking for, okay, where is this from? And so if the seller is saying it's not from China, but then the packages is saying it's from China, then it'll be an easy reveal, and then people are gonna go, okay, he's not trustworthy. So there's no incentive to.
Yeah. All right, any other further questions? I think this is a fascinating line of research. That's quite interesting. One second. One question that's come in with respect to the data. Can you identify within Keepa whether a seller has paid Amazon to appear more prominently in the search? Also, can you identify how Amazon users have rated particular reviews, helpful versus unhelpful?
So I think the first part was with respect whether you know whether they paid Amazon or not. That one you cannot know. But remember, the placement of where Amazon keeps you is important. But more important for you as a buyer or as an informed buyer is you want to see, okay, is this seller actually, has it sold to people? And then, okay, what about the ratings? Because even if it's prominent, I as a buyer normally not only care about whether it's the first one appears, but I also care, is this a trustworthy buyer or seller? So look at the ratings. So normally if you have ratings, then you tend to sell more. If you don't have any ratings, then people might distrust you about buying. So it's not just about the whether you have the right placement, but also whether you're giving the signal through the ratings, whether you are a trustworthy seller. And I think the second part was, can you identify how Amazon users have rated particular reviews? Yes. So normally we could also see whether they consider it helpful and unhelpful. So even within the rating is not just a simple average of all the ratings given by customers, but also by, was it a very helpful rating because they provided a lot of details? So that rating will actually be placed more prominently. And then recent ratings will also be placed more prominently on the entirety of comments. So yes, you can normally see whether it was helpful or unhelpful, because normally at the bottom of the review it says helpful or unhelpful rated by people.
Okay, thank you. Another comment and question in the chat starts, thanks for the question. The information on how to identify a Chinese product we get is exactly the same as the consumers. If a product cannot be identified as Chinese product and information known by consumer, then they would not respond either. I think that was more a comment
from my caller.
Yes. Yeah.
So they are getting exactly the same information, like Tanyang is mentioning.
Yeah. All right, any further questions? Well, I will thank all of the presenters for a great great discussion this morning. Any questions, since we have a few minutes, on kind of an overview of the papers? Or all right, well, with that, I will conclude our session. Again, thank you to each of the 4 presenters. Interesting, timely topic, and I've learned a lot. This was great. Thank you. Roman, I have a question for you.
Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
Oh, all good. At one point, it told me that there was a lot of background noise from my computer that I should mute. Do you still hear that?
I don't. I'm not sure. Was someone else talking at the time?
Could have been. I guess I was just checking in because I present my paper at 8:30, and I wanted to know if I had a computer problem. I should try to sort out.
I would guess maybe your speakers were coming back over the microphone. I don't know. I didn't see anything. I usually get as the host a little exclamation point if something is wrong. I didn't get anything for yours. So okay.
Thank you, and thank you for hosting and taping this. And great.
Yeah, no problem. Take care. Enjoy your presentation the rest of the day.
Thank you. Bye.